Funny how old things always find their way back, my daughter-in-law said with a smile as she lifted her champagne glass beneath the crystal chandeliers of the Grandmore Hotel ballroom. And the moment I saw the diamond bracelet around her wrist, the air seemed to leave my lungs. I hadn't seen that bracelet in 18 years. Not since the night it vanished from my bedroom safe during one of the worst winters of my marriage. The flowers before I even came downstairs. She'd smiled gently and said, "I thought this layout looked more modern." Modern, as if grief itself needed redecorating. I looked again at the bracelet around her wrist. White diamonds set in platinum. Tiny sapphire clasp hidden underneath. Thomas had given it to me on our 25th anniversary during a weekend trip to Charleston. He'd hidden the velvet box inside a basket of fresh peaches from the farmer's market because he knew I loved simple surprises more than grand gestures. "A beautiful woman deserves something beautiful," he'd whispered while we sat on the hotel balcony overlooking the water. I wore that bracelet for years, until the night it disappeared. At the time, Rebecca had only been dating Ethan for 6 months. Young, charming, sweet in a careful way that always felt rehearsed to me. I remember coming home from a charity dinner and finding my bedroom door slightly open. The safe untouched on the outside, but empty inside. Thomas had been furious in a quiet, frightening way I rarely saw. He questioned the cleaning staff, changed the alarm company, spent thousands upgrading security cameras around the house. But eventually, life moved on the way it always does. The bracelet became another sad mystery people stopped mentioning. Everyone except me. Some losses never fully disappear. They simply wait in silence. "Mom," Ethan touched my elbow gently. "You okay?" I realized I'd been staring too long. "Of course," I answered smoothly. "Just thinking how grown-up Lily looks tonight." Ethan smiled faintly, relieved by my answer. He never liked tension. Even as a little boy, he used to cry whenever Thomas and I argued about money or long work hours. Rebecca understood that weakness quickly after marrying him. She learned how to smooth things over before difficult questions could be asked. "You should sit down," she said warmly. "You've been standing in heels for almost an hour." Her voice was kind enough to fool anyone listening. That was Rebecca's talent. She never sounded cruel. She simply made people feel small with perfect manners and soft smiles. "I'm fine," I replied. Then I looked directly at the bracelet. "Once more? That piece looks familiar." Her expression froze. Only for a second, but I saw it. "Oh, this." She laughed lightly. "I found it in a vintage jewelry shop in Boston last month." "Can you believe it?" "Boston." Another polished lie delivered without hesitation. I nodded slowly as though I believed her. Around us, glasses clinked. Someone announced dessert near the ballroom entrance. The scent of vanilla cake and roses drifted through the air. But beneath all that elegance, something old had started breathing again. Something buried. Something patient. Rebecca lifted her champagne glass toward me once more, but this time her hand trembled slightly. Very slightly. Most people would never notice. I did. Because for the first time in nearly 2 decades, Rebecca Hale looked afraid of me. I left the engagement party just after 10 that night, long before the younger guests drifted toward the dance floor and expensive cocktails loosened their laughter into something louder. The drive home felt strangely quiet, even though rain tapped steadily against the windshield the entire way. Chicago in late October always carried a certain heaviness after dark. Wet streets, bare trees, storefront lights reflecting across puddles like broken glass. I kept both hands on the steering wheel and replayed Rebecca's face in my mind over and over again. Not the smile she showed everyone else. The moment underneath it. The flicker of panic she could not completely hide. That bracelet had belonged to me. I knew every inch of it the same way a woman remembers the sound of her husband's voice long after he is gone. You do not forget certain things. You simply stop speaking about them because nobody else wants to hear the story anymore. My house sat at the end of a quiet street lined with old maple trees. Thomas bought it 34 years ago when Ethan was still in elementary school. Back then the neighborhood smelled like fresh cut grass and charcoal grills during the summer. Children rode bicycles until the streetlights came on. Wives exchanged casserole dishes over fences. Everything had felt permanent. Safe. I parked slowly inside the garage and remained sitting in the car for a moment longer than necessary. The rain continued hitting the roof in soft, uneven rhythms. When Thomas was alive, he used to wait up for me whenever I returned home late from events. He always pretended he had not been worried. "I was just reading," he would say from his leather chair with a book still open in his lap. Sometimes I still expected to see the downstairs lamp glowing through the kitchen window when I came home. Grief does not disappear with time. It simply becomes quieter. I finally stepped inside and locked the front door behind me. The house smelled faintly of cedarwood and old books. I had never changed much after Thomas passed away. His reading glasses still rested beside the den sofa. His navy coat still hung in the front closet because I could not bring myself to move it. Rebecca once told me gently that keeping things untouched was unhealthy. "You deserve a fresh start, Margaret," she had said while reorganizing my pantry without asking permission. Fresh start. People always say things like that when they want you to erase pieces of yourself for their comfort. I slipped off my heels near the staircase and walked slowly toward the kitchen. My feet ached from standing most of the evening, but something deeper unsettled me tonight. Not fear. Not exactly anger either. It felt closer to recognition, like hearing a song you had not heard in 20 years and suddenly remembering every word. I poured myself a small glass of water and stood silently at the kitchen counter while rain streaked down the windows. Then I remembered the last night I saw the bracelet. Thomas and I had hosted a winter charity fundraiser at the house. Rebecca attended with Ethan for the first time that evening. She was 21 years old then. Blonde hair, cream-colored dress, perfect posture. She complimented everything she saw with the careful enthusiasm of someone studying a future she desperately wanted to belong to. I remember catching her alone upstairs once near our bedroom hallway. "I was looking for the restroom," she explained quickly. At the time, I believed her. Why would I not? She was dating my son. Ethan adored her already. Later that night, after the guests left, I opened my safe to put away the bracelet Thomas had asked me to wear for the event. It was gone, along with a pair of sapphire earrings and nearly $8,000 in cash we kept for emergency household expenses. Thomas searched the entire bedroom himself. Every drawer, every closet shelf. He even emptied laundry baskets onto the floor. Nothing. The next morning, he called the security company. 2 cameras inside the hallway had mysteriously stopped recording for nearly 40 minutes during the party. Coincidence, the technicians said. Thomas did not believe in coincidences. Neither did I, but no proof ever surfaced. Ethan defended Rebecca before anyone even accused her directly. She would never do something like that, he insisted at breakfast one morning after overhearing Thomas speaking with the insurance company. Rebecca cried later that afternoon in the sunroom. Quiet tears. Controlled tears. The kind that make decent people feel guilty for doubting you. Thomas apologized to her personally that evening, even though he never actually named her as a suspect. After that, the subject disappeared from family conversations completely. Ethan married her 2 years later. Life moved on. Or at least everyone pretended it did. I carried my water upstairs and paused halfway down the hallway outside Thomas's old study. The door remained closed most days now. I rarely entered anymore because the room still smelled like his cologne and old paper. Tonight, however, something pulled me toward it. I opened the door slowly. Moonlight spilled faintly across the desk near the windows. Everything remained exactly where he left it. Legal pads stacked neatly beside his fountain pen. Framed photographs from business trips. His favorite bourbon untouched on the shelf. I moved toward the desk carefully and rested my fingers against the wood surface. Then I noticed something I had not seen before. One of the lower drawers was slightly open, barely an inch, just enough to catch my attention. Inside sat an old navy blue folder beneath several tax records and property documents. My heartbeat slowed, because written across the front in Thomas's unmistakable handwriting were for words I had not seen in nearly 2 decades. Rebecca, December 2005. I stood in Thomas's study for a very long time without opening the folder. The grandfather clock downstairs ticked steadily through the silence, while rain continued falling outside the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed through the city. Everything around me felt ordinary, calm, but my hands would not stop trembling. Thomas had always been careful with documents. Organized. Methodical. During our marriage, he labeled everything from insurance files to vacation receipts with neat handwriting and exact dates. If he created a folder with Rebecca's name on it, there was a reason. I slowly sat down in his leather chair, the same chair where he used to read financial reports late into the night with his glasses slipping down his nose. The navy folder felt heavier than paper should feel. Inside were several documents clipped together in precise order. Security reports, printed emails, copies of bank withdrawals, and near the top, a photograph. Rebecca, much younger, standing outside a pawn shop on West Belmont Avenue wearing the same cream-colored coat she wore the night of the fundraiser. The timestamp in the corner read December 14th, 2005. 2 days after my bracelet disappeared. I stared at the picture until my vision blurred slightly. Not because I was shocked. Deep down, perhaps I had known for years. Women notice things they pretend not to notice because peace inside a family often costs more than truth. Beneath the photograph sat a short handwritten note from Thomas. I hired Leonard Pierce privately after the insurance company closed the claim. Rebecca visited Marston Jewelry and loaned twice that week. She sold 2 sapphire pieces matching Margaret's missing earrings. No formal charges filed. Ethan would not survive the humiliation. I closed my eyes slowly. Ethan was 24 years old then. Sensitive, idealistic, completely in love with Rebecca. Back then he still believed love could fix broken parts of people. Maybe Thomas believed that too for a while. I continued reading. Thomas documented everything carefully over several months. Rebecca had accumulated nearly $40,000 in credit card debt before meeting Ethan. There were records showing unpaid loans, bounced rent checks, and one lawsuit quietly settled out of court involving missing funds from a nonprofit charity event where she volunteered during college. None of it alone proved she was dangerous, but together, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Thomas even wrote that sentence himself in black ink near the margin of one report. Individually concerning, collectively alarming. I pressed my fingertips against my temple. 20 years. 20 years of birthdays, holidays, family photographs. 20 years of sitting across from Rebecca at Thanksgiving dinners while she smiled sweetly and passed cranberry sauce as though she had never stolen from us. But the theft itself no longer disturbed me most. It was the manipulation afterward. The tears. The performance. The way she turned suspicion into guilt until Thomas himself apologized to her. That required more than desperation. It required skill. I suddenly remembered another evening years later after Ethan and Rebecca married. We had hosted Christmas dinner for business associates and extended family. At some point during dessert, Rebecca leaned toward me with a soft smile and quietly said, "People trust me very easily. I think it is because I never look threatening." At the time I laughed politely because it sounded harmless. Now the memory settled differently. Colder. I reached for another document near the bottom of the folder and froze when I saw my own name typed across the top, beside the words estate revision notes. Thomas had planned to change portions of his will 6 years ago. There were handwritten annotations discussing asset protections and limitations involving Ethan's future access to certain trust accounts if outside financial influence becomes concerning. Outside financial influence. Rebecca. But the revisions were never finalized. A sticky note attached to the page explained why. Ethan threatened to cut contact if I continued questioning her. My chest tightened painfully. Ethan had not spoken to Thomas for nearly 3 weeks after a terrible argument during Labor Day weekend 6 years ago. I remember the silence in the house afterward. Thomas pretending to watch football while checking his phone every 20 minutes. Pride kept men quiet even when their hearts were breaking. Eventually, Ethan returned. Rebecca returned with him. Smiling, calm, carrying homemade peach cobbler as though nothing had happened. Families rarely collapse in dramatic moments. They erode slowly through compromise and avoidance. One uncomfortable truth at a time. I carefully returned the documents to the folder exactly as I found them. Then I noticed one final item tucked beneath the paperwork. A sealed envelope with my name written across the front. Margaret. In Thomas's handwriting. My throat tightened instantly. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page folded neatly in half. If you are reading this, then you finally saw something I prayed you would never have to see. I kept quiet because Ethan loved her, and because I believed time might change things. Maybe that was cowardice. Maybe it was hope. But if Rebecca ever becomes frightened of you, pay attention. Fear makes dishonest people careless. I stared at the final sentence for a long moment. Then I remembered Rebecca's trembling hand holding the champagne glass at Lily's engagement party. Fear makes dishonest people careless. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the city. I stood from the desk and carried the folder toward the bookshelf near the fireplace. That was when I noticed something else missing from the room. A framed photograph Thomas always kept beside his desk drawer had disappeared. The picture showed the three of us during Ethan's college graduation. Thomas smiling proudly between his son and me beneath bright spring sunlight. I looked around the study carefully. The empty spot on the shelf remained visible beneath a thin outline of dust. Someone had removed the frame recently. And suddenly, for the first time all evening, I understood something terrifying. Rebecca had already been inside this room. I barely slept that night. Every sound inside the house felt sharper than usual. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Pipes shifting softly behind the walls. Rainwater dripping steadily from the gutters outside my bedroom window. Around 3 in the morning, I finally gave up pretending sleep would come and walked downstairs wrapped in Thomas's old navy cardigan. The house felt colder lately. Or perhaps I simply noticed the emptiness more now that silence no longer distracted me from the truth. I made coffee slowly, the way Thomas liked it, strong enough to wake the dead, as he used to joke every morning while reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. For years our routines had been predictable, comfortable, ordinary in the best possible way. Then Rebecca entered our lives and slowly changed the temperature of everything without anyone fully realizing it at first. Looking back now, I could see it clearly, not through dramatic moments, through small ones. Tiny shifts that seemed harmless until they formed a pattern impossible to ignore. I remembered the first Thanksgiving after Ethan married her. Rebecca arrived carrying expensive candles and a perfectly arranged charcuterie board from some upscale market downtown. I thought we could modernize dinner a little, she said sweetly, while moving my homemade centerpieces farther down the table to make room for hers. Everyone complimented her taste. I smiled politely and moved my own decorations aside. That became the rhythm of our relationship for years. Rebecca replacing things quietly while making it seem helpful. Helpful was her favorite disguise. By sunrise, the storm outside had faded into soft gray drizzle. I carried my coffee into the den and opened the navy folder again beneath the glow of the table lamp. The more I reread Thomas's notes, the more exhausted he sounded in the margins. Not angry, not hateful, just tired. One line near the bottom of a financial report stayed with me. Every conflict with Rebecca somehow becomes Ethan defending her against us instead of asking questions. Thomas underlined the word questions twice. He had always valued honesty more than comfort. That quality made business negotiations difficult for him sometimes, but it also made him respected. People trusted Thomas Hale because he never manipulated emotions to get his way. Rebecca did the opposite. She understood. Emotions were often more powerful than facts. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed softly on the coffee table. Ethan. I stared at his name for a moment before answering. Morning, Mom, he said, sounding distracted. I could hear traffic in the background and the muffled echo of voices, probably outside his office downtown. Did you get home all right last night? I did, I answered calmly. The party was lovely. A brief silence followed. Ethan hesitated the way he always did when something uncomfortable hovered beneath the conversation. Rebecca mentioned you seemed a little quiet toward the end of the evening. Of course she noticed. Rebecca noticed everything. I was tired, I replied. Large parties wear me out these days. Another pause. You know how much Lily wanted you there, he added gently, almost defensively, as though protecting the evening itself from criticism that never came. I know, I said softly. She looked beautiful. His voice relaxed slightly after that. Ethan hated tension so deeply that even imagined conflict unsettled him. When he was 12 years old, Thomas once raised his voice during an argument with a contractor renovating our kitchen. Ethan locked himself in his bedroom afterward for nearly an hour because hearing anger physically upset him. Rebecca learned very early that if she remained calm while others became emotional, Ethan would instinctively side with her. We are stopping by the house tomorrow afternoon, Ethan said. Rebecca wants to bring over some leftover desserts from the engagement party. I looked down at the open folder beside me. That is thoughtful. Around 2. That is fine. We ended the call politely, but after I set the phone down, a strange certainty settled over me. Rebecca was not bringing desserts. She was coming to see whether I knew. I closed the folder carefully and returned it to the drawer inside Thomas's study. Then I replaced everything exactly as I found it, including the slight opening in the bottom drawer. If Rebecca had already searched this room recently, I did not want her realizing someone else had found the documents too. Fear makes dishonest people careless. Thomas's words repeated, quietly in my mind all morning. By noon the rain finally stopped. Weak sunlight filtered through the clouds, casting pale reflections across the hardwood floors. I spent the afternoon doing ordinary things because ordinary things help me think clearly. Folding laundry, watering plants, wiping fingerprints from kitchen counters. Years ago, my mother once told me that women survive heartbreak by continuing small routines long after emotions become unbearable. The dishes still need washing even when your heart is breaking, she used to say. I understood her better now. Around 1:30, I walked upstairs to change clothes before Ethan and Rebecca arrived. As I passed the hallway mirror, I paused unexpectedly. Age had softened my face over the years. Silver hair, fine lines near my eyes, a widow's quietness settling into my posture. Rebecca often treated me like someone fading gently into the background of family life. Harmless, sentimental, easy to dismiss. Perhaps that was my advantage now. People reveal more around women they no longer consider powerful. I chose a cream-colored sweater Thomas always liked and simple pearl earrings. Nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational. Then I looked at myself one final time before heading downstairs. Calm, steady, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of woman Rebecca believed she understood completely. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened the front door before Rebecca could ring the bell a second time. She stood on the porch holding 2 white bakery boxes tied neatly with gold ribbon, while Ethan waited beside her carrying a bottle of wine. The afternoon sunlight fell across Rebecca's face in a way that made her look younger than 39. Soft makeup, perfect hair, careful smile. She had spent nearly 2 decades building the image of a woman people instantly trusted. Margaret, she said warmly, leaning forward to kiss my cheek. We brought lemon tarts from that bakery you like downtown. Her perfume smelled faintly of jasmine and vanilla. Expensive, controlled. Ethan smiled tiredly behind her. Traffic was awful getting out of the city. Come in, I said calmly, stepping aside. Rebecca's eyes moved through the foyer immediately. Not obvious enough for Ethan to notice. But I saw it. The quick scan toward the staircase. The hallway leading to Thomas's study. Measuring. Checking. The same way she must have checked the room 18 years ago after stealing from us. The house looks beautiful, she said as she removed her coat. You always keep everything so elegant. Another skill of hers. Compliments that sounded sincere while quietly reminding you how much effort it took to remain relevant. Ethan carried the wine into the kitchen while Rebecca followed me more slowly behind him. You should really think about updating the dining room curtains eventually, she added lightly. Something brighter might make the space feel younger. Younger. Rebecca spoke about age the way some people discuss bad weather. Politely. Constantly. I smiled faintly and placed coffee mugs onto the counter. I have grown attached to the old ones. Of course, she replied softly. Sentimental things are hard to let go of. The sentence hung between us for half a second longer than necessary. Then Ethan re-entered the kitchen, breaking the tension without even realizing it existed. We sat together in the den drinking coffee while Rebecca carefully arranged pastries onto one of my serving plates as though she owned the room. Ethan talked about work downtown, mergers, client meetings, endless conference calls. I listened quietly while Rebecca occasionally corrected small details in his stories the way she always did. Actually, the dinner was Wednesday, not Tuesday. No, darling, Boston was last month. Tiny corrections. Tiny demonstrations of control. Thomas used to notice them too. Once during a family vacation in Cape Cod years ago, he leaned toward me after dinner and whispered, "Your daughter-in-law edits Ethan like a schoolteacher fixing grammar." At the time I told him he was being unfair. Funny how truth often sounds cruel before it becomes obvious. Rebecca picked up her coffee cup carefully, her diamond bracelet catching sunlight from the windows. Lily was so happy you came to the engagement party, she said casually. She worried you might still be grieving too heavily after Thomas passed. There it was. Grief. Rebecca liked reminding people I was fragile now. Easier to dismiss fragile women. Your father would have loved seeing Lily so happy, Ethan added quietly. For the first time all afternoon, genuine sadness crossed his face. My heart tightened slightly. Ethan was not a cruel man. Weak sometimes. Blind certainly, but not cruel. Rebecca reached over and squeezed his hand immediately. guiding the emotional current of the conversation away from dangerous places before silence could deepen naturally. Thomas always loved family celebrations, she said smoothly. He believed people should focus on happy memories. I looked directly at her. Did he? For the first time since arriving, Rebecca hesitated before answering. Very briefly. Of course. I folded my napkin carefully across my lap. That is interesting. Toward the end of his life, Thomas seemed much more interested in truth than comfort. Ethan frowned slightly at that. Rebecca smiled too quickly. Well, sometimes those become the same thing eventually. Fear makes dishonest people careless. Thomas's words echoed again inside my mind. I took a slow sip of coffee before speaking. I went into Thomas's study last night. Rebecca's hand froze around her cup. Barely noticeable, but enough. Ethan looked up. Really? You have not been in there much since the funeral. No, I replied softly, but I felt close to him there. Rebecca set down her coffee with deliberate calm. That must have been emotional. It was. I let silence settle naturally between us. Ethan shifted slightly in his chair, uncomfortable, as always whenever conversations became too quiet. Rebecca finally spoke again. Did you find what you were looking for? Such a careful question. Not what did you find. What were you looking for? I met her eyes steadily. I found more than I expected. Ethan glanced between us now, sensing tension without understanding it. Rebecca smiled lightly and reached for a lemon tart she did not eat. Thomas kept so many old papers in that room. Honestly, half of it should probably be shredded eventually. Probably, I agreed calmly. Some things become dangerous when they survive too long. Rebecca looked at me then. Really looked at me for the first time in years. Not as an aging widow. Not as Ethan's sentimental mother. But as someone standing unexpectedly on the other side of a locked door she thought would never open. The room became very still after that. Even Ethan noticed it. Did I miss something? He asked with an awkward laugh. Neither Rebecca nor I answered immediately. Then the grandfather clock in the hallway began striking 3 o'clock, each heavy chime echoing softly through the house, while Rebecca's smile slowly disappeared. The silence after Ethan's question stretched longer than it should have. I could almost see his discomfort settling across the room like fog. Ethan had spent his entire life trying to keep peace between people he loved, even when peace required pretending not to notice what stood directly in front of him. Rebecca recovered first. She always did. I think your mother means grief changes how people see the past, she said smoothly, lifting her coffee cup again with steady hands. Sometimes old memories feel more important after someone dies. Her voice sounded warm enough to soothe anyone listening casually, but I noticed she no longer touched the diamond bracelet around her wrist. Maybe, I replied softly, or maybe certain memories simply wait until people are finally ready to face them honestly. Ethan let out a quiet breath and stood from his chair. I should probably bring those extra dessert boxes in from the car before we forget. Rebecca looked up quickly. I can help you. No need, he said. I will only be a minute. The moment the front door closed behind him, the atmosphere inside the den changed completely. Rebecca slowly set down her cup onto the glass coffee table. No smile now. No softness. Just calculation. What exactly did you find in Thomas's study? She asked quietly. I folded my hands together in my lap before answering. Interesting question. Margaret. Her tone sharpened slightly. If there is something you want to say, I would appreciate directness. I almost smiled at that. Rebecca asking for honesty felt strangely ironic after 20 years of manipulation wrapped inside perfect manners. Thomas kept more records than I realized, I answered calmly. Her eyes did not leave my face. Records of what? Family matters. The room remained still except for the ticking clock in the hallway. Rebecca leaned back slowly against the sofa cushion, studying me now with open caution. You have always disliked me, she said after a moment. I used to wonder why. Did you? Yes. She crossed her legs carefully. I spent years trying to make this family work despite your judgment. Judgment? Such an elegant word for instinct. You misunderstand me, I replied. I did not dislike you at first. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. Rebecca preferred emotional reactions because emotional people became easier to control. Calmness forced her into unfamiliar territory. Then what changed? She asked. I looked directly at the bracelet on her wrist. Perhaps you should tell me. Her face lost color instantly. Only slightly, but enough. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Outside, I could hear Ethan opening the trunk of his car in the driveway. Rebecca finally laughed softly, though no amusement reached her eyes. You really think that bracelet belonged to you? I know it did. Another silence. Then something surprising happened. Rebecca stopped pretending entirely. Her expression hardened into something colder and far more honest than the charming daughter-in-law everyone else believed they knew. It was 20 years ago, she said quietly. People make mistakes when they are young. I felt my heartbeat slow instead of quicken, because hearing her admit even that much changed everything. So it was you. Rebecca looked toward the front windows briefly before answering. I was desperate back then. Ethan had nothing. I had student loans, collection agencies calling nonstop, 2 roommates in a tiny apartment that smelled like mildew. You and Thomas lived in this enormous house with closets bigger than my entire bedroom growing up. Her voice remained controlled, but resentment flickered underneath every word now. You have no idea what it feels like to watch rich people treat security like oxygen, like something guaranteed. Stealing from us did not solve that. No, she admitted quietly. But surviving people rarely think long-term. I studied her face carefully. For the first time in 20 years, Rebecca looked tired. Not polished, not composed, just tired. Thomas knew, I said softly. That finally shook her. Her shoulders stiffened instantly. What? He hired a private investigator after the theft. She stared at me in silence. That is impossible. He found records, photographs, pawn shop receipts. Rebecca's breathing became shallower. Then why did he never confront me? Because Ethan loved you. I watched the answer land heavily between us. Rebecca looked away first. Thomas hated me near the end. She whispered almost to herself. No, I replied quietly. He feared what you were turning Ethan into. The front door opened before she could answer. Ethan walked back inside carrying 2 pastry boxes while humming absent-mindedly under his breath. The moment he entered the den, Rebecca's entire expression transformed again. Calm smile, relaxed posture, perfect control restored so quickly it almost frightened me. Everything okay in here? Ethan asked cheerfully. Of course, Rebecca answered before I could speak. Your mother and I were just talking about old family memories. Ethan smiled with visible relief. Good. I keep hoping one day you two will stop acting like distant relatives at weddings. Rebecca laughed softly and touched his arm affectionately. The performance had resumed flawlessly, but now I could see the machinery underneath it. Ethan began unpacking pastries onto the coffee table while describing traffic near downtown construction zones. Rebecca nodded in all the right places, but her attention remained fixed on me. Measuring, calculating, afraid. I lifted my coffee cup calmly and held her gaze across the room. Then, very gently, I said the one sentence Thomas never lived long enough to say himself. Time does not erase what people do, Rebecca. It only teaches them how to hide it better. Ethan stopped speaking mid-sentence and looked between us again with confusion. Rebecca smiled immediately. That sounds almost philosophical. But this time, her voice trembled. After Ethan and Rebecca left that afternoon, the house felt strangely quieter than before, as though the walls themselves had overheard too much. I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the untouched lemon tarts still arranged neatly on my serving plate. Rebecca always brought beautiful things into rooms after making them uncomfortable. Expensive pastries, fresh flowers, elegant smiles, decorations over damage. I wrapped the desserts carefully in plastic and placed them inside the refrigerator beside leftover soup I had made earlier that week. Ordinary motions kept my thoughts from spiraling too quickly. Thomas used to say I organized kitchens whenever life became difficult because order made me feel safe. Maybe he was right. Around 6 o'clock that evening, my phone buzzed again. Ethan's name appeared across the screen. I answered after the second ring. Mom. His voice sounded hesitant. Did something happen today between you and Rebecca? I leaned against the kitchen counter quietly before responding. Why would you ask that? A pause. She has been acting strange since we left your house. I looked toward the dark hallway leading to Thomas's study. Perhaps she is tired. Ethan exhaled softly. No, it is more than that. She barely spoke during dinner and then locked herself in the bedroom for almost an hour. His voice lowered slightly. Did she say something to upset you? There it was again. Ethan searching desperately for a version of reality where tension came from misunderstanding instead of truth. No, I answered carefully. We simply discussed the past. Rebecca said you accused her of something. Silence settled between us for several seconds. I could almost picture Ethan standing in his modern kitchen downtown, one hand pressed against his forehead the way he always did during stressful conversations. Did she tell you what? I asked quietly. No, another pause. That is what worries me. I closed my eyes briefly. Thomas had hidden the truth for years to protect Ethan from pain. Perhaps I finally understood why. Some truths do not arrive like explosions. They arrive like slow fractures spreading beneath the surface of a life someone believed was stable. Ethan, I said gently, has Rebecca ever lied to you? He sounded genuinely surprised. What kind of question is that? A simple one. Everybody lies occasionally. That is not what I asked. He fell silent again. I heard distant city noise through the phone. Sirens somewhere far away. Car horns. The restless sound of downtown Chicago after dark. I trust my wife, he said finally, though the certainty in his voice felt thinner now. I know you do. Then why are you asking me this? I looked down at my wedding ring still resting on my finger months after Thomas's funeral. I had not removed it once. Because your father asked himself the same question many years ago. Ethan stopped breathing for a moment. I could hear it. What does Dad have to do with this? More than you realize. Mom. His voice sharpened slightly now. If there is something you are trying to say, just say it. I walked slowly into the den and sat near the darkened window overlooking the backyard. Bare tree branches moved gently in the evening wind. Do you remember the winter fundraiser at our house in 2005? Barely. Something valuable disappeared that night. I remember hearing about it. He paused. The bracelet. I felt my heartbeat steady strangely at hearing him say the word aloud. Yes. Another silence followed. Then Ethan laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Rebecca told me years ago you always suspected her. Did she? She cried about it once after we got married. His voice grew quieter. She said your family looked down on her because she did not come from money. I stared at the reflection of the room in the dark window glass. And what did you believe? I believed my wife. Fair answer. Honest answer. The kind Thomas never received because everyone around Rebecca became too busy managing emotions to ask harder questions. Your father hired a private investigator, I said softly. The silence afterward felt endless. What? After the theft? Ethan's breathing changed instantly. That is impossible. Dad would have told me. No, he would not. Why not? I answered gently because cruelty was unnecessary now. Because he was afraid of losing you. I heard movement on the other end of the line. A chair scraping across hardwood floors. Then Rebecca's voice faintly in the background asking who he was talking to. Ethan lowered his voice immediately afterward. Mom, what exactly are you saying? I closed my eyes briefly before answering. I am saying your father discovered things he could never fully ignore. And neither can I anymore. Rebecca's muffled voice came closer through the phone. Ethan, then footsteps. Then silence again. I need to go, he said quickly, but now fear had entered his voice too. Not certainty. Not anger. Fear. Of course. Mom. He hesitated. Did Dad leave proof? I looked toward Thomas's study one more time. Yes. Another long silence. Then quietly, almost like a frightened little boy instead of a 42-year-old attorney, Ethan whispered the question Thomas spent 20 years protecting him from. What if she really did it? 3 days passed before Ethan came to the house alone. In those 3 days, Rebecca never called me once. No carefully polite messages. No offers to stop by with soup or flowers. Silence can reveal more than arguments ever do. I spent those mornings quietly moving through the house, while November rain drifted across Chicago in soft gray waves. The maple trees outside had almost lost all their leaves now, leaving thin dark branches scratching gently against the sky. On Thursday afternoon, I was sitting in the sunroom folding clean towels when I heard Ethan's car pull into the driveway. One door closed. Only one. I already knew before he rang the bell that Rebecca had not come with him. Ethan looked exhausted when I opened the door. His tie hung loose around his neck and dark circles rested beneath his eyes like bruises made from sleeplessness instead of impact. He held no wine bottle today. No pastries. No performance of normalcy. Can I come in? He asked quietly. Of course. He stepped inside slowly, glancing around the foyer as though the house itself had changed somehow since childhood. Perhaps it had. Or perhaps he finally had. We sat in the den without turning on the television or making coffee. Silence settled between us heavily but not unkindly. Ethan kept rubbing his palms together the way he used to before difficult exams in law school. I barely slept after our phone call, he admitted finally. Rebecca said you were manipulating me because you never accepted her. I listened quietly. Then she got angry. His voice lowered. Really angry. At you? At the situation. He stared down at his hands. She kept saying my father always hated her and that you were trying to destroy our marriage now that he is gone. Marriage. Such a fragile word when trust begins cracking underneath it. I reached toward the side table beside me, where Thomas's navy folder rested neatly beneath a hardcover novel. Ethan noticed it immediately. His face tightened. That is it. Yes. He looked at the folder for several seconds without touching it. Mom, his voice sounded smaller somehow. If I read this, and everything changes. He stopped speaking before finishing the sentence. I understood anyway. Some people fear truth less than they fear becoming strangers inside their own lives afterward. You do not have to decide anything today, I said gently. Ethan let out a quiet laugh with no humor inside it. That sounds exactly like Dad. The sentence hit me harder than I expected. Thomas had always spoken carefully during painful moments. Calmly, thoughtfully. He believed people deserve dignity even when facing ugly truths. Perhaps that was why Rebecca unsettled him so deeply. She used emotions like weapons while pretending they were gifts. Ethan finally picked up the folder with trembling hands. He opened it slowly, reading in silence while afternoon light faded inch by inch across the room. I watched his face change gradually with every page. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something far worse. Recognition. Oh my God, he whispered eventually, staring at the pawn shop photograph. She told me this coat was stolen from her apartment years ago. I said nothing. Ethan continued reading Thomas's notes while breathing more unevenly now. Twice he removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes. Once he stood up and walked to the window without speaking for nearly a full minute. Finally he reached the estate revision documents. Dad wanted to change the trust because of her. Yes. Ethan swallowed hard. Why did he not tell me? Because he loved you. The answer shattered something inside him. I saw it happen quietly across his face. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a son realizing his father spent years carrying fear alone because protecting him mattered more than being believed. Ethan sat back down slowly. I accused him of controlling behavior during that argument 6 years ago. His voice cracked softly. Rebecca convinced me he was trying to isolate us financially. I remembered that weekend clearly now. Thomas standing alone in the kitchen afterward pretending he was not devastated while staring at untouched coffee growing cold in his hands. He never stopped loving you, I said quietly. Ethan nodded without looking up. Tears rested in his eyes now, though he fought them hard. I think part of me always knew something was wrong. What do you mean? He laughed bitterly under his breath. Little things. Stories that never lined up perfectly. Money disappearing once from our vacation account. Rebecca blaming waiters or bank errors or anyone nearby. He shook his head slowly. Every time I questioned it, she cried. Or reminded me how your family judged her for growing up poor. He looked exhausted saying it aloud. Eventually it became easier not to ask questions. Exactly what Rebecca wanted. I leaned back quietly while the grandfather clock echoed through the hallway again. Ethan stared down at the final letter Thomas wrote before speaking very softly. She wore the bracelet to Lily's engagement party because she thought enough time had passed. Yes. And she never imagined you would recognize it. No. Ethan closed the folder carefully and rested both hands over it for several long seconds. Then he asked the question that mattered more than any other. What do we do now? I looked toward the dark windows where evening shadows had fully settled across the yard. Somewhere upstairs, the old pipes shifted softly inside the walls. The house sounded older lately. Tired perhaps, but not broken. We tell the truth, I answered calmly. Ethan looked frightened again. At Lily's engagement gala next Saturday? Yes. He stared at me in disbelief. In front of everyone? I folded my hands quietly in my lap. Rebecca built her life publicly, Ethan. The truth belongs there too. The engagement gala took place the following Saturday at the Blackstone Country Club just outside the city, the same place where Thomas and I celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary years earlier beneath strings of white lights and late summer stars. Tonight the ballroom glowed with polished elegance again. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above perfectly dressed guests, while servers moved gracefully between tables carrying champagne and small silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. Rebecca stood near the center of the room, greeting people with effortless charm, her silver gown catching the light every time she turned. To everyone else, she still looked untouchable, calm, beautiful, successful. But I noticed the tension hidden beneath her posture now. The way her smile faded whenever she thought no one was watching. The way her eyes searched the room repeatedly until they found Ethan standing beside me near the entrance. He had barely spoken during the drive there. Grief and betrayal had settled over him heavily these past few days, aging him somehow. "We do not have to do this publicly," he whispered quietly as guests drifted around us. "You can still change your mind." I adjusted the pearl bracelet at my wrist slowly before answering. "Your father spent 20 years protecting silence, Ethan. Look where it brought him." He lowered his eyes after that. Across the ballroom, Rebecca finally noticed the navy folder tucked beneath my arm. The color drained from her face instantly. It happened so quickly that only someone looking directly at her would have seen it. I did. Music from the string quartet floated softly through the ballroom, while Lily and her fiancé thanked guests near the dance floor. Family friends laughed around candlelit tables. Business associates discussed investments and vacation homes. The Hale family image remained polished and perfect right up until the moment truth entered the room beside us. Rebecca crossed the ballroom toward us with controlled elegance. "Margaret," she said softly once she reached us. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" "No," I answered calmly. Ethan stiffened beside me. Rebecca's smile tightened. "Please. I think enough things have happened privately." Her eyes flashed briefly with panic. "You are upsetting Ethan." "No," Ethan said quietly before I could answer. Rebecca looked at him immediately. "Excuse me." He met her gaze with visible pain now. I read Dad's file. For one suspended moment, everything around us seemed to disappear. The music, the laughter, the clinking glasses. Rebecca stared at Ethan without speaking while fear slowly replaced control across her face. "Ethan," she whispered carefully, "your mother is manipulating old misunderstandings. You stole from them." The sentence landed softly between us, but it carried the weight of 20 years. Rebecca looked around quickly then, realizing several nearby guests had started noticing the tension. "This is not the place for this conversation." "You wore her bracelet to Lily's engagement party," Ethan continued quietly. "You thought nobody would remember." Rebecca reached toward his arm instinctively, but he stepped back before she could touch him. That hurt her more visibly than accusation itself. Rebecca's greatest strength had always been proximity, keeping people emotionally close enough to guide what they believed. "I was young," she said finally, her composure cracking for the first time. "I made mistakes." "You lied for 20 years, Ethan answered. "To me, to Dad, to everyone." Nearby conversations began fading now as more guests noticed the confrontation unfolding. Lily looked confused across the ballroom. Several older family friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. Rebecca turned toward me, then with something almost desperate in her expression. "Margaret, please." It was the first honest word she had spoken to me in years. "Please." No charm attached. No performance. Just fear. I looked at her quietly for several seconds before speaking. "Thomas gave me that bracelet on our anniversary in Charleston," I said softly enough that only the closest people could hear. "He hid it inside a basket of peaches because he knew I loved simple surprises." Rebecca lowered her eyes. "I remember," she whispered. Ethan inhaled sharply beside me. That answer alone confirmed everything. Tears filled his eyes instantly, though he blinked them back hard. "Oh my God," he said under his breath. Rebecca began crying then. Real tears this time. Not polished ones. Exhausted ones. "I never thought it would matter anymore," she whispered. "I thought enough time had passed." "That is the problem with buried things," I replied calmly. "People mistake silence for disappearance." The ballroom had gone nearly quiet around us now. No screaming. No dramatic scene. Just truth settling heavily into the middle of a room that once admired appearances more than honesty. Rebecca removed the diamond bracelet from her wrist slowly with trembling fingers. Then she held it toward me. "I should have returned this years ago." I looked at the bracelet for a long moment before shaking my head gently. "No." Rebecca stared at me in confusion. "I do not want it anymore." Ethan turned toward me then, shocked. "Mom." It stopped being jewelry a long time ago. I folded my hands calmly over the navy folder beneath my arm. What mattered was whether the truth still existed. Rebecca lowered the bracelet slowly, tears sliding silently down her face now, while guests pretended not to watch. Ethan looked broken beside her. Not because of money or scandal, because trust, once shattered quietly over decades, leaves people unsure which memories still belong to them honestly. I glanced toward the ballroom windows where snow had just begun falling softly outside against the dark Chicago sky. Winter arriving again, 18 years later, almost to the exact week. Then I looked back at Rebecca one final time. People think time erases what they bury, I said quietly. It does not. It only waits.